Welcome everybody to Informative Friday. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Luke to kick things off.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Welcome everybody. Appreciate you taking the time out of your busy Friday to join us for the Informative Friday session today. We will be covering, and somebody stopped sharing the screen. So,
oh, excuse me. Hold on. Sorry. That was me, wasn't it?
That was you.
Let's go back. Are we in business?
We are. Yes,
Sorry
thank you. Just as a friendly reminder, we will be recording the session today and dropping that out on our YouTube page shortly after. We've got a couple of folks on that'll be presenting today. They'll be monitoring the chat as well for any questions that come through. And again, thank you for joining us. As many of you may know, Nordic Consulting acquired Bales & Associates just over 2 years ago now. We've continued and will continue to do great Infor ERP work that we're known for, and which will be done under the Nordic brand moving forward. So as part of the last transition of the acquisition, the Bales logo will be going away, but nothing about our business or how we conduct our business will be changing. So that's the good news. So go ahead, next slide there, Casey. Just a few things about Nordic, if you're not familiar with their services and kind of where we fit in. So they have 4 different kind of tiers there. The Performance Improvement Group is thought leadership and advisory services that Nordic conducts. Also, the Digital Transformation Group is kind of the they look at all tiers of digital health within healthcare and other sectors. And they also have a dedicated managed services team and technical support similar to what we offer on our ERP side. And then, of course, kind of where we fit in mostly is the implementation and support services platform for EHR and ERP. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Casey and Chris, and then we'll start their slides.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you for that introduction. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Burge. I am a supply chain solutions architect here at Nordic. I have been with Nordic since 2017, so I think I'm going on my 6th year if I can do math correctly. And I have had the pleasure of implementing or supporting over 15, I might be up to 20 now, FSM clients. So love FSM, have worked again with many wonderful clients. I am also a mom of 2 sweet little boys. I have a 1.5 and a 3.5-year-old. And one question I'd love to ask my clients during icebreakers, and I don't think I've ever answered myself, is what is the best Amazon purchase you made this year? So I thought, oh, I'm going to answer that question. I think that's fun. So I went through my Amazon cart, my prior purchases, and if you guys haven't done that, I would highly recommend it. It is hilarious to go see what you've bought. But definitely the number one thing is what in our house we call them sticky handprints, but they are the slap hands, like the silicone handprints that are like super stretchy. If you've got small children, they are hours and hours of fun. So next up I have here, I'll let my fellow presenter introduce himself.
Hey, good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Putney. I am a supply chain consultant here at Nordic. I've been part of the Nordic team since about 2018. I have over 15 years in the healthcare industry. I've wore a lot of hats during that time with patient care, transportation. I focused a lot in the supply chain piece, of course. So for that procurement piece, I also did a little bit of work in philanthropy. So that was great. I am the proud father of a beautiful 9-month-old baby girl, and my best I would want to say Amazon purchase so far, having a little girl who is crawling around everywhere and getting into everything right now. I would say the best purchase, maybe not the funnest, but it is the Roomba vacuum. If you don't have a Roomba vacuum, it is a lifesaver. It just saves so much time, so I highly recommend that.
Oh, might have to go check that out. I do not have a Roomba, so that's a good buy.
Yes, it is. It's great. So before we get into our presentation, we do have to present our disclaimer that this material is in reference to Infor FSM only. This presentation is for informational purposes only. We just want to provide you with, any considerations that you need to make the best decision as possible for your organization. Reliance on the information presented without consultation is at your own risk, and we highly recommend that you contact Nordic to discuss how solutions can be tailored specifically to your needs. And I'll turn it over to Casey.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. All right. So what is on our agenda today? So if you are Chris or I and you are live on FSM, we heard of this new Infor functionality of supplier created requisitions through Supplier Portal, and both of us were like, nope, no way. It's not possible, right? You need two very important pieces of information, right, when you're building a requisition, or that are required, quite frankly, right? And that is requesters and requesting locations. And so neither of which those things have to do with Supplier Portal that I was aware of, right? So suppliers are not requesters. They never have been, right? So we were wondering, how could this possibly work? So if you felt the same way as Chris and I, then you are in for a fabulous presentation, because we think this new functionality is, honestly, it's so cool. It is a great enhancement that was introduced by Infor, and we're going to show you how this new Supplier Portal functionality works. So first things first is we are going to focus the scenario around requisitions for bill only. However, this could be for, any other purposes, but now these can be created and submitted by supplier representatives directly in Supplier Portal. Okay, so these requisitions can go and be approved by a requester or an approver, sent through the rest of the requisition or rec to check process. And we're going to review a Visio flow in just a second, so you can visually see this process and where it sits in your existing rec to check flow. So we're going to describe that out. Next, we're going to go over some setup pieces, because there's quite a bit of setup that we want to review, or that needs to be created for this process to work seamlessly. So we want to make sure we review each of those setup pieces for you inside FSM, and also share our recommendations for how this process can, work smoothly for you and your suppliers. And then lastly, the fun part, right, we're going to do a demonstration. So luckily I have Chris, who is actually a representative for Chris's Medical Supplies, and he is going to be our supplier today, who is going to initiate this request for an item he would like to be paid for, okay, from our company. And we're going to show you then from a client perspective, how do you handle that request and how does it move through FSM, okay? So that is what we are covering today. So we've got, a lot of fun things to cover. So first things first is this Visio flow. So this is a very, again, if you get this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF, here is the screenshot of this Visio flow, just for you to reference, but I'm going to pull it up on a bigger screen. So hopefully, is this bigger,
Yeah,
Chris?
That looks great. Yeah.
It's good. Okay, awesome. So first things first is, where does this new piece, this new functionality, I should say, fit in your existing rec to check process? Oh, and I lost it again. Get back. There it is. Oh, give me 1 second. I should just use the PowerPoint. There we go. So this new functionality is going to sit right on top. Okay, so it's going to just stay there. Okay, we're going to just look at it from the screen because it keeps popping back to my PowerPoint. But so I say it sits right on top, but it really sits right before the requisition process would normally begin. So if you are using a custom rec approval flow, or maybe the just Infor delivered rec approval flow, this new functionality is not going to replace or bypass that. It's just going to complement the existing process that you have in place, okay, or the delivered process that Infor has written. So how this looks at a high level is, first, the supplier is going to enter the request through Supplier Portal. And notice, the verbiage here is request. They're not calling it a requisition yet, okay? Because it's not quite a true requisition in FSM. So you're going to determine with setup when they submit that request, does it need approval before it can move forward? Okay. So when we say approval, this is not your typical requisition approval. Okay. This is in addition to your existing rec approval flow. Okay. Within your organization, if you're utilizing rec flow. Okay. So the requester is actually going to be the approver in this case, okay? So they're going to have the option to reject, which is just going to obviously stop that requisition in its tracks, okay? It's done, right? Or they can choose to return to supplier for updates, okay? So that supplier can then make changes and then re-release the requisition again for approval. Or the requester can, of course, then approve it, okay? Once they approve it, and that's where I'm at right here, right? That requisition is still unreleased. Okay, so just because the approval happened, that just means that they've checked off all the boxes, they reviewed the information that the supplier entered on the request, and then them as the approver, after they approve it, they are going to release the requisition through that process. So what does that mean? So now it's just a normal requisition. Okay, so regardless if you have that requester approving it, it still has to be released before you continue through the rest of the process flow. And then everything else should look pretty familiar from that point on, right? It's going to look to see, obviously, does it require requisition approval? If the answer is yes, it's going to go through rec approval flow. If the answer is no, it's going to get routed straight to the buyer, who is going to create and release and issue that purchase order. And then ultimately a receipt is going to be created, whether or not that's through an EDI program or a receipt interface or just a manual receipt. And then lastly, of course, the invoice is going to get entered and matched and paid. Okay, so if I had like an imaginary line, right, with where this process starts, it would probably be right here, and that'd be cool. I should probably put that on there, right? So everything above this is this new process that we're going to review today. All right, so next piece we are going to get into is setup. So we have several slides on setup here within the system, but we are going to go into FSM so I can actually show you these setup pieces, okay? There are quite a few items that need enabled before this works, or it just needs a flag, just needs adjusted to accommodate this new process flow. So the first piece of setup that we are going to review is the requester profile. So if I go into FSM and go to my requester setup. All right, and again, if I remind you, in our demo or in our use case today, we're saying that the reason the supplier is creating this requisition is for a bill-only request. Okay, this would have maybe been a requisition that was previously submitted by somebody working in your operating room, right? It's somebody internally. Now you're going to pass this over to the supplier to enter this requisition for a bill-only item. So the item they're requesting is going to be a special item. It's going to be implanted in the patient, and they ultimately need a purchase order to be created so they can invoice against that item, okay? So the two fields, there's two that I'm focused on the requester piece, okay? Because of this process, we are going to recommend that the requester have the allow display of procedure information be selected so that they can review the procedure information entered by the supplier on that request, okay? This is not a new field. This has always been there, but we're going to recommend that that get flagged or just go review that setup for those specific requesters that are going to have the ability to do this. And the second field, which I'm sure if you're live on FSM, you would have seen this field show up towards the end of last year. The second field is called Can Review Supplier Requisitions. So this gives the ability to those specific requesters to be the approvers or reviewers of these requisitions. Okay, they have to have this checkbox selected to be part of the drop-down list for those valid requesters. So these are the two fields in the requester profile we want to review or have you review in your organization. Next setup piece is going to be under the buyer role. So not the buyer role, the buyer profile. So if you navigate to your buyer profile, All right, and it is very similar to the requester profile, but here we're looking for allow display of procedure information. Okay, so again, this is a bill-only request. We want to make sure you have a buyer set up that can also view that procedure information that the supplier may enter into their request. Okay, so just double check and make sure you have at least a buyer that would submit those POs, that they have that access to do that as well. All right, moving through the rest of our setup. So next piece is purchasing company. So if I open up my purchasing company, the tabs we want you to review first is the procedure output information. Okay, this is saying what's going to print on the purchase order, what is going to transmit via EDI, and then what can be masked to your vendor, right? These fields are also available on a specific purchasing vendor and a purchase from location. So I'm just showing you from the purchasing company business class, but it also can be controlled down to the vendor or purchase from location. Okay. So here you just want to look and see what are you transmitting to your vendor and make sure that you've reviewed, what this information is, especially if your vendor is requiring it and then it follows with your company policies. The other piece I want to show you about is the document templates tab. So it is recommended, especially if you're using IDM and for document management, there are 2 PO sample templates that Infor provides. One is just the standard purchase order document template. The other one has purchase order bill only sample IDM template, I think in the name. We're going to recommend that you use that bill only template because it automatically has all of the procedure info fields accessible. So the standard document template that Infor provides does not. So you can again go pull those down from sample document templates, but if you are printing this PO and you want, that patient procedure information to show up on that document that you create, you do want to make sure that you have the bill only or you've configured the other one correctly to show those fields. Okay, but Infor has done the hard work for you. So using the bill only template's a safe bet. All right, next is we're going to look at purchase order codes or PO codes. So let's take a look at our purchase order code setup. So when we're looking at a PO code, we can assign it to a bill code. A bill code identifies to the vendor the type of billing that is going to be used for that purchase order. Okay. And bill codes, if you haven't built a PO code, a bill code can be related to a PO code. So in this case, I've got a PO code called bill. My description is bill only, and I've attached it to the bill only PO code so that whenever I put the PO code of bill on a purchase order, it's automatically going to update my billing code to bill only, which is what I want. So it is not a requirement because when you go to create the purchase order, you can manually change it to bill only if you'd like, but we have a pre-built one here making that connection piece, so it'll do it automatically. All right, so less intervention. All right, next setup piece is the supplier group. So let's go look at our supplier group. All right, and if you've been looking at your supplier group recently, if you navigate to the Supplier Portal Access tab, you're going to see when you scroll down, this is obviously all the different functionality pieces that Supplier Portal offers, but there is a new one that was introduced right here called Create Requisitions. So that is the new functionality piece for the supplier created requisitions. So with this, we are going to select whether or not the primary contact or other contacts have the ability to, at the supplier group, this is basically for all suppliers, okay? So we want to control this. I'm going to leave these unchecked because we want to control this per supplier contact record, okay? So if you select these checkboxes, you're basically saying globally, every supplier has access to create requisitions through the supplier portal. We're going to say, no, we're going to select very few suppliers that have been trained and understand this process. Okay. So what's also included here is the procedure access hyperlink. So if you click that procedure access hyperlink, this is going to display those fields that the suppliers would see and be able to enter data into on their request. So if there are fields here that you don't need and they don't need to fill out, right? Maybe you don't care about the UID or you don't do G10s, you can uncheck that checkbox and it's one less field that they will see when they are in Supplier Portal. Okay. So if we're not going to maintain, right, if we're going to leave these two checkboxes empty on the supplier group, we need to go take a look at a specific supplier to enable this access to them. Okay, so we are going to go to our supplier record. And this is controlled by the supplier contact. Grab my supplier record. Okay, and I'm going to go to the contact tab. Here is Chris's medical supply. So when I open up Chris as the contact for the supplier, I also have the portal access tab. Okay, and if I scroll down right here is where it says access allowed is no, right? Because I have said I'm going to control it per supplier. So it has not been enabled on the supplier group. So you want to select the give access button. Okay. And as soon as you select give access, a new tab is going to appear under your supplier's contact information called Supplier Requisitions. Okay. So we want to go to Supplier Requisitions and we want to configure this. Okay. So on this tab, you're going to determine defaults for this contact when they're creating the requisitions through Supplier Portal. Okay. So the first set of defaults that we can determine is the line creation options. So we've got 3: allow template, allow contract search, and allow ad hoc. So allow template, if this checkbox is selected, it's going to allow this contact to create a requisition from a procurement template. And again, if you're live on FSM, you're like, wait, what? How can that be? Well, there is a new participant that's been added to your procurement template participants form, and it's called vendor. So this is going to allow the supplier to view the templates in Supplier Portal if their vendor record is attached as a participant to that procurement template. Okay, that's a big mouthful, but that is how that functionality works. And so basically it's like an easy shopping list where they can go and add items to create requisitions for. The next option is allow contract search. So this would allow your contact, of course, to search for items on contract. So anywhere their vendor and supplier record has the match, right? It's going to pull over all those contracts for them to be able to shop from, similar to your shopping list, but this is directly from a contract that's been loaded through contract management. And then the last one is allow ad hoc, right? Which is just, of course, ad hoc, adding special items, manually identifying all that information themselves. Okay, so you have those 3 options and you can limit or allow with these checkboxes. The next option is when non-contract items exist, what do you want to do? So you can leave it blank where nothing will happen, right? If it's not on contract, we're not going to stop them. No problem. We can just leave it blank. The other 2 options are error on submit, which sounds like what it would do, right? If the item is not on contract and it does not see a contract loaded through your contract management system, then it will not allow the supplier to complete that request. Okay. And the other option is warning. Of course, it's just going to warn them before they submit that if the item is not on contract. There is an option here to auto approve. Okay, so if checked, it is not going to require the requester or reviewer to approve before this gets released. Okay, we want to leave this unchecked because we're going to recommend that this gets reviewed by a requester, and we're going to see why through our demo. Okay. And then the other defaults, right? We want to default, or we have the option to default a requester, a requesting location, and your inventory company. I'm going to highly recommend that you set these defaults for your suppliers because I don't think we'd want them to have the option to pick who's the requester that should be reviewing this, what the requesting location this is submitted against, right? Let's default that for them so it's less fields that they have to select, okay? So we're going to populate that. We've populated that here with some defaults. And then the last item is those procedure information fields that we set to display at the supplier group level, you can now control that again at the supplier contact level. So if you want to update those checkboxes specifically for the supplier, you can do so that way. Okay. All right. And all right, sorry. So I wanted to get through. That was a lot of setup, but I want to make sure I give plenty of time because we are ready to go into our demonstration. So we are going to now perform a demonstration. Chris is going to be our supplier, and I will let him take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Casey. I'm sharing my screen. You should be able to see it now.
I see it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Casey. So, yeah, as Casey had mentioned, there is a little bit of setup here for you, but it's going to help save a lot of time, not only for people like within that work in your warehouse. If you were like me, the many years that I worked at a hospital, I was not only responsible for making sure that supplies were delivered to surgery and making sure that case carts are ready, but I also had to do the bill only piece for these procedures. And it was very time consuming, particularly unloading pallets all day long, and at the end I had to submit something on behalf of the supplier, and in this case, the supplier is going to be able to do it themselves. And so it's, if you're like me, this was like such a wonderful thing to have this be to be able to use this, of course. Big time saver. So anyways, let me get off my pedestal there, and right here you can see our supplier portal page, our sign in here. I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my credentials. Okay, and I am now in. This is the supplier portals page specific to Chris's medical supplies, and we now have this new tab available that Casey had turned on for us, and that is going to be for requisitions. We're going to go ahead and create a requisition now for this particular case. Let's see here. So Casey had also mentioned that there was you can set the supplier defaults, and it's highly recommended. Well, it is a known bug right now, and this is going to be fixed in the October 2023 CU. This information doesn't populate, but to get this to populate, if you have defaults, you can just click next and then previous. So that will be fixed in October, but you do see the defaults that were set up at my supplier level there. Have our requesting location, inventory company, and then our reviewer. We'll go ahead and click next here. Well, actually, let's go ahead and provide, we like details here, particularly if it's something that's going to be, a procedure. So let's say hip replacement. Okay. Click next. Okay, and so on this page, we can provide a more additional information. First off, we have our procurement templates here. If there was the vendor and supplier relationship set up on a procurement template, as Casey had alluded to, that this supplier or vendor rather would be able to use the procurement template, you would be able to select that here. In this case, we have a contract. Just wanted to show that we're actually going to go ahead and submit an ad hoc here in this particular case. But should you want to copy all lines from a procurement template, let's say that there's a procurement template that's created and it has all of the necessary components for a hip replacement, you can make your life a little bit easier and just copy all lines down to the next area or the next page, the lines piece. Moving on down here, we have patient procedure information. So again, these are flags that were turned on and enabled for our supplier. And this is where pretty much your supplier is going to be entering in the information of the particular case. So we will do a visit number, MRN number, last name. I'm gonna just fill out this information for this procedure. Over to that to the purchase order, particularly for using IDM and using the bill only piece as well. Just entering some more information here. And then another piece that I want to point out here too, as we're putting some more information here, is our order, our supplier order number. I think this is a wonderful feature. This is going to allow the supplier to internally tie their order number so more information can pass along to the invoice. Really like this feature here. Okay, we have our procedure information filled out, and now let's go ahead and move on to our lines. What was used in this procedure? So if we were allowed to again use that procurement template on our little helper list here, we could either select contract items. So if this if you have the supplier and vendor relationship set up and they are associated, let's say a striker, for instance, right? If you have like a striker contract, you can associate it with the supplier and you would be able to select items from their contract as well as template lines if they were going to be, associated, a participant of that template. So that would be on the helper list there. But we're going to go ahead and create ad hoc in this case. We are going to do a just create the item and put in the information as we see fit. Going to provide our information here. Let's do quantity 1, unit measures each. Again, you can add additional information here on that particular product. I think it's very helpful with particularly surgical equipment, implants that might be going into particular patients. You can provide the details, manufacturing date of that particular product, its serial number, as well as lot number, and expiration date. Should they should that product expire, right? I know pacemakers would have an expiration date to a degree where they would have to be replaced, but and as of course can't forget our GTIN. But we're gonna leave that blank for now, just more information that can pass through. We'll go ahead and submit it, and then our line populates. I'm going to add another line. Say our vendor item and our manufacturer part are identical here. Populating our unit cost now. Okay. All right, so we have 2 items in this demonstration here. We have our hip socket and a couple hip screws here for this procedure. I'm sure there would be a lot more to this complex procedure that Dr. Burge has done for our patient George Jones. But at this point, I think we're okay with our requisition with these items for this demonstration. I will go ahead and click next now. And a couple things here. We can submit our requisition right now, but if you also did want to click into the requisition to view that, you can click on the requisition hyperlink. And this just kind of gives you the summary of all the information that you submitted there. We have our lines, procedure information, and our header details. Should you have any attachments, you could provide that there. Maybe it's just the case sheet of all of the stickers of the items that were used that can be provided as an attachment from the supplier. And from here, we can just go ahead and click on submit. Now, once that is submitted, a couple of things to just to point out here, the requisition status is still in unreleased, and it needs to be reviewed by the reviewer that was set up on the supplier. In this case, it would be Casey that would be reviewing that. She would receive an email letting her know, hey, there was a supplier originated requisition that was submitted, and it needs to be reviewed. So with that, we can turn that back over to Casey, and we can go through the review process.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. All right. So the process is not over, right? We want to continue to push this through and show you now as the client and as the requester and reviewer, how does that look? That supplier has Chris officially submitted the requisition for me to review. So I am first going to start in the requester role. So if you have implemented requisitions and you have seen the requester screen, there is a new homepage, and I call it a widget. I'm not sure what the official Infor term is, but there is a new widget called Supplier Requisitions to Review. So if you were wondering, what does that mean? What is that new box that shows up? This is what it is for. So now a requester can quickly see what are the requisitions waiting for review, right? What action needs to be taken. So you'll see I have a few here immediately. This shows up immediately when Chris released it or submitted it, I should say, from Supplier Portal. So there is his request right there, request 849. There's also a new menu option that displayed. So if you're using the delivered requester security role by Infor, if you scroll down, there is a new menu option called Supplier Requisitions. So if we click Supplier Requisitions, this is going to give you a whole new tab of information to review. So there's a few buckets, I guess I'll say, lists. First is requisitions to review. So this is all the submitted requisitions from a supplier waiting for approval. So this mimics that widget on the requester homepage, okay? Next, we have unsubmitted requisitions. So these are ones where suppliers are still working them in Supplier Portal, where they have not clicked the submit button. So you can see them still. So you can see what items are they adding, what information are they doing, but they have not submitted them officially for your review yet. Okay, so those are sitting out there on Supplier Portal. We then have all requisitions, right? So these are going to be all submitted requisitions and their statuses, especially if they're completed or rejected or in the middle of the process flow. These are going to be, it's your catch-all tab. You also have a tab here called Supplier Contact Defaults. And so this usually takes a minute to load. But if you remember when we looked at our supplier contact setup and we set the defaults at the supplier contact record, the requester has the ability to see how you allowed them to create that request and what you defaulted for them. The requester does not have the ability to change it. Okay, so this is just a view only business class for the requester. And last is the procurement template. So we talked about, again, as long as the vendor for a supplier is attached as a procurement template participant, you are going to see all the procurement templates out there that suppliers can view. Okay, so that is what those these 5 new tabs of information are for the requester. So I'm going to go back to requisitions to review. Okay, and if I highlight Chris's requisition, which was 849, there are some actions that I can take, or we have several options that we can do. First is approve, right? Obviously, approve is going to allow that requisition to move from move to released status. Okay, so that requisition is still, I should say, a release status as far as me approving it from the Supplier Portal piece. I still have to release the requisition to continue through the rest of the processing. I'm just approving that whatever they've put in there, I'm good with all the information. The other action I have is to return to supplier for updates. So maybe after reviewing it, I'm like, oh, I don't think they entered this information correctly, or I don't think this date is right, or I don't think the cost is right, whatever it may be, right? You can return it back to them, which unsubmits it on their side, and they get an email that says, hey, you need to make these corrections, and then go re-release it for approval. Okay, of course, I can reject it saying, no, we're not going to accept this as to move through the requisition process. That could be an action you take. Okay, and they're going to get an email about that. We can start a supplier dialogue. So you're going to see this is popping up on a lot of menu options where you can directly communicate with the supplier through FSM. So you can actually start a discussion back and forth if you have questions about the requisition they submitted. And then you also have the option to change the reviewer or requester, right? Maybe you don't want it to be you, right? Maybe you're like, oh, that shouldn't have been me that should be approving this or reviewing this information. Let me pass it to somebody else. You have the ability to change who that person is, okay? So we talked about, I don't prefer the auto approve, because in this case of our scenario of a bill only request, there are pieces of information that I need to fix on the requisition or update on the requisition before I put it through the approval flow process. So that's why we like this middle piece of the approver. Okay, so one piece of information is your bill code, right? We just talked about, oh, we want to make sure we have the bill only PO code or bill code associated with this requisition, so that when it goes to a PO, that is also assigned on the purchase order. Well, I did not see anywhere where Chris could select that, right? So that's not a field available to the supplier to select. So we know that's something we have to intervene and enter ourselves. Another item that could come up is missing or fixing distributions. Chris did not have the ability to update, create, or adjust any kind of distribution information on the rec. But of course, depending on your defaults, this could populate. But for a special item, if it's not on contract, there's a good possibility that there's going to be an issue with your distribution. So you need to go in and review or correct those. I also probably want to take a look at the procedure information, right? If they entered all this information in, we talked about this, I probably want to review that before I personally approve this requisition myself. Okay, so we're going to go make those few changes, and then I'm going to release this requisition to go through to the next step. So I open my requisition, and I'm first going to go ahead and go to the line tab. So I can even see there's already a red exclamation point. I see line errors. And I have a feeling it's because of my distribution. So if I highlight that error, maybe message doesn't pop up. Well, I'll just go ahead and click view the line error. And that is what the problem is. So it was able to default my distributions a majority of the way, but it is not grabbing that expense account. So I do know I have to intervene for this. So that is what I thought. So let's open up the line because I have to do these individually. First thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and attach my PO code of bill only. So in the PO code field, I'm going to type in bill only. And when I click save, we're going to see my bill code will adjust automatically. So do that. And there it is. There is my bill code. While I'm on the line, I'm going to go ahead and fix my distribution error. So I'll go to distributions. And I'm going to select my account. And my error goes away. And the last piece I'm going to look at is that procedure information, right? So we know that he entered that information on his side. And the fact that I can see it means, remember, we looked at our requester setup and we said I have the ability to allow display of procedure information so I can see what he entered. So I've got the visit number, the medical record number. Oh my gosh, I heard that Dr. Burge is pretty awesome. And the coordinating nurse is even better. So wow, this was a good successful surgery, I'm sure. So I can see all that, which is great. So I'm going to go and do the same to the second line, right? Because I only corrected the issues on one line. So let's go to my second line. I'm going to add my PO code. Perfect. And then I'm going to go update my distributions. All right, and my error goes away. So I think I did all the review that I needed to do on this request. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select approve. So you can see, I just want to, before I click approve, right here, the status says unreleased. Watch what happens when I approve it. Nothing, right? The status does not change. So again, when I showed you the diagram, this approval is in addition to your existing requisition approval. It does not bypass it. It does not override it. It's just an additional step of approving it, saying somebody has reviewed it and they're okay with moving this through the rest of the FSM process. Okay. So with that, I will go ahead and click release. And now we're going to see the status change. And of course, depending on how your rec approval flow is set up, right? It could go to processed immediately because we don't have requisition approval flow turned on at the moment, or it's going to go to needs approval and go through that rec approval flow. Okay. Now, I know I'm getting close on time, so I'm just going to talk through this. But so I've submitted this request as the requester, right? It is processed. If you go to the buyer role, this just follows your normal flow, right? It's going to sit under manage purchase requests. And more than likely, you probably have a process purchase request job sitting here running maybe on an hourly basis to pick up these requests and create purchase orders for them. What we recommend, and let's see here, is it right? Is it here? Yep, there it's sitting there. What we recommend is that you have you're probably going to have to set up another job, a process purchase request job that is specifically for your bill only POs. Okay, so you'd have in your filters or in your criteria of that job, it would be using that PO code of bill only to identify the specific request you want to create purchase orders for, or your bill code. Okay. So once you submit that, it's going to grab that request. It's going to create the PO. And then more than likely, you also have a mass PO issue job running right behind that. So that would get issued to your vendor automatically if you have that set up, especially if you have a mass PO issue with just those bill codes set up. And then we have the receipts, right? It's a requirement that, in FSM, if we don't create a receipt for this item, it's going to sit on INR till the end of time, right? Unless you purge. So we need to make sure we create that automatic receipt because it's a bill only, right? We do not need the vendor to ship the goods. Actually, we don't want them to ship the goods. We're specifically just trying to get the invoice to pay. So you would run a job called mass create purchase order receipts, again, with those same parameters of your bill only, purchase order code or bill code. Okay. So that's just talking through the process. But those additional pieces would happen. But the key here is to make sure that we saw that requisition get created from Supplier Portal and back over to FSM for the reviewer to review. So with that, I'm going to go back to that is the end of our demo. I'm going to go back to our slides.
Right, no, be quiet. Don't say a word.
And so does anybody have any questions?
Yes, this is Agatha at Montefiore Medical Center. One of the issues that we have is that we require maybe the requisition that the vendor answered is incorrect. Maybe they left something out or they answered the wrong quantity. It seems like the system doesn't allow them to change it.
You're right. So I didn't demo that. I select approve, but if I go back and I'll go to one that's sitting here, if I go back to the requester role and go there, great question. So one of the options that you have is to return to supplier for updates. So that's the option that I would select if I was you, that after you were reviewing it, you looked at the request and said, oh goodness, you submitted it for 2 and it should have been for 20, right? You can send it back to them, and like in this case, Chris would have gotten an email immediately saying that I have unreleased the requisition, and they would have to go and log into Supplier Portal and see why and make that adjustment and then re-release it.
I understand that piece, but the problem is that they took time to go into Epic to review that case to make sure it's done correctly. If they kick it back to the vendor, they have to relook at that case again in Epic, and that's when they don't want to duplicate their work. They want to be able to make the changes themselves.
So the requester wants to be able to make the
Yes.
changes themselves. Okay, and they can. So yeah, we didn't look at that, but if I go into this requisition, I have the ability to adjust the requested quantity and actually any information. I can change the price, I can change the quantity, I can add the vendor, I can do all of that.
But before I approve it.
Before you approve it, exactly.
So, and does that change get notification go back to the vendor?
That's a great question. Let me see. So Chris was the requester. Let me see who the supplier is on this one. Is it me? I'm going to go ahead and make some big changes to this real fast. So I changed the quantity. I'll change this to 5. I'm going to save it. And I am going to once a year.
And also, just to add to that too, so from the supplier portal, they do have your supplier does have the ability to look at the history of all the requisitions that they've submitted. So if there was a change to what they had submitted, they would be able to see that once that got sent back to them, or if there was a change before the approval process happened, they can view that under the supplier portal under my requisitions.
Okay, so they'll have to just go in and look at it and they'll see it.
Correct.
Sorry, I'm trying to get I had a bad one. All right.
And the other piece that I saw is that you enter the price. If it's a contracted item, does the price automatically populate based on our agreement?
If they choose to create that supplier from a contract, right? So those options under the supplier contact setup, you determine how you want them to create it. So if you have a procurement template that was created from a contract, I would probably do that, or make sure that the contract checkbox is selected so that they have to. And maybe you take away the ad hoc so you know the item is coming from a contract.
Right.
So yeah, so I just updated, I should say, a requisition with some information, and I released it. I'm going to see if I get an email as the supplier. Did they get notified that we made adjustments? And if they don't, then as Chris said, they would have access to just go view that on Supplier Portal if it's not a push notification sent to them. So, and I didn't. So the only email I got was that it was approved. So no, to answer your question, they don't get an email if the requester, before they reviewed it, made changes.
Was there an opportunity when you approved it to put comments so they would get the comments back to say, hey, I approved this, but I made the following changes?
There is not by default the delivered flow. That is definitely something that an IPA, developer could look at when they took the action, that if you have a pop-up box that you have to select, probably if you approved it, I'm not sure you would add comments, but a lot of the delivered flows within FSM, if you reject it or unrelease it, you have to enter a comment code and a comment. So there may be some configuration work to do that for the approve action.
So if you change and approve, there's no comment. Okay, maybe I'll put an enhancement.
Yeah, that would be delivered. But if you have a developer, I'm sure that's something that could be added when you select that action. Great question. So are you using this?
We're not live yet, but we are going to use the supplier portal. So I'm just, wanted to just see it because I haven't really seen it to go through the process. So this was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jerry, for inviting me.
Yeah, sorry it was quick. I know it was probably pretty fast. We only had an hour, and I know we want to cover a lot, and I would love to do
you did a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining, and I'm so excited to hear that, you're in the process of implementing it. We thought it was really cool. When Chris and I saw this, we thought it was really, really cool functionality. So we wanted to make sure that the Infor community, was aware of how awesome it was.
Yeah, because we were going to make them requesters. So now we don't have to do that anymore because of the supplier portal.
Exactly. You don't have to do that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I know we had 2 questions from the registration of this that I just want to hit on. And I don't know if I'm not sure who the attendees were that submitted these questions, but one question we got was, does Supplier Portal interface with punch-out capability? So the short answer is no. Currently, there is no interface, or there's not an interface with punch-out right now. So I'm, maybe if you are here on the call and have, we kind of have some follow-up questions to understand, with punch-out, that's for requesters to request goods, right, from a vendor's website. So I'm wondering, is the reason this question was brought up is, are they wanting the suppliers to have access to their own vendors' punch-out websites to create these recs? Is that where that question was leading? And I'm not sure if the person on that submitted that question is here, but that was very interesting. But right now there's not. Probably another great enhancement request if that's where you were going, right? That you'd like the vendor to have access to their own punch out site to pick the items that they need for the request. The other question we got was, can I allow requesters to suggest a solicitation event using RSS and then push it to the supplier portal? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And that is existing functionality now. So in your RSS setup, there is a flag to show or hide sourcing event. So if that is set to show, the requester is going to have a checkbox called sourcing event required. And that's going to be under their profile settings. So they'd have to select that before they begin the request. Once the requisition is processed, that gets moved over to the sourcing manager by default, and it sits in a bucket called create event from requisitions. So the sourcing manager is who controls whether or not that requisition gets turned into event. There is and subsequently appears over to suppliers in Supplier Portal. So if you've done sourcing, you know there is lots of setup pieces to an event to create it and process it. So it does not go directly from RSS to Supplier Portal. There is that middle piece of the sourcing manager to make sure those event details are coded properly before it appears in Supplier Portal. But yes, that by default, yes, that functionality does exist. So just check your RSS setup to make sure that show or hide sourcing event is set to show, because maybe that's why you're not aware that it's out there.
Casey, this is Agatha. I have another question. I
Yes.
didn't see where when you created the supplier created the requisition, I didn't see anything about a commodity code. Is that an option that they
Ooh.
have where they enter the commodity code when they create these requisitions?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. Chris, can you share your screen? I don't think we've seen commodity code that isn't available.
Yeah, because the GL number is going to always be a problem, and we have linked our GL numbers to the commodity code.
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't want the user to do anything. It should be automatically populated.
Yeah, and so there's so many places you can default your distributions, but yeah, commodity code is not a delivered field, it looks like. But again, that could be either put in an enhancement request or create your own configuration to this form to show commodity code and have it be selected. There are other ways to default distributions as well, like, half of them are coming from, the requesting location probably, right? That account, if the item's on contract, you can code that expense account directly to the item on contract. Same thing with your procurement template. So there are ways to get around that missing distribution piece. But if
the contract, I'm sorry, if the contract has that GL distribution code, it'll carry forward to the request.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
great. Okay, that's good. That solves it.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, I love it.
Because we are coding our contracts with a commodity code that has a GL number associated to it.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? All right, I will give it back over to Luke to close it out for us.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. Great session, everybody. Great input from the audience as well. I know we're coming up at the top of the hour, but just a couple more slides. We're still offering our coffee with consultants. So reach out to us at nordicglobal.com/contact, and we'll be happy to set up a time, a 30-minute meeting with any of our subject matter experts with regards to any ERP Infor topic you'd like to discuss. We have 2 more sessions coming up here next Friday and the Friday after that. So next Friday, the May 19th, will be focused on Lawson V10 and current state of V10. And then the following will be anything BI related when it comes to FSM dimensional security. If you're not registered for those and you'd like to get registered, reach out to Molly Velasco. She's here on the chat. Just drop her an email and she'll be happy to get you registered. And then upcoming Informative Friday sessions will be start back up in August of this year. So go ahead and plan for those. We typically get the agendas out about 2 weeks prior to the first one, so keep an eye out for those. And then last but certainly not least, we'll be at Infor Connect coming up in St. Paul, May 22nd through the 25th. And the 4 mugshots on this screen will be in attendance. So feel free to stop by the Nordic booth and come see us and chat about any needs you have ERP related. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy Friday to join us, and hopefully get to talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you.